This is Metro Week. Our top story, Tucson has a new city manager. We'll interview Michael Ortega about his first month on the job and his future goals. Then our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. Michael Ortega began his job as Tucson City Manager this month. We'll sit down with him to find out how it's going. But first, a look at his credentials. Before the Tucson City Council hired Michael Ortega, it promoted Martha Durkin as the interim city manager. She worked in the city manager's office for several years and took the promotion to interim under the condition that she could not apply for the permanent position. She's still working for the city, now as deputy city manager. Michael Ortega started his job in Tucson on July 1st. Before that, he was the Cochise County Administrator. There, he managed a budget less than a tenth of the size of the city's, in a rural county with a smaller population than the city of Tucson. He's also had a number of other jobs in city, county, and state government, including 2 tenures as city manager in Douglas, split by a stint as the Arizona Department of Transportation's chief engineer. His higher education is in civil engineering and business administration from the University of Arizona. I sat down with Mr. Ortega here at City Hall to interview him about his priorities and his goals as he transitions into the job as the city's top unelected official. What have you been doing this month to get settled in the job?
Well, I've been meeting with council members and their staff, taking tours of their wards, really trying to get an understanding of what priorities they have for not only their wards, but also for the Tucson community. I've also spent a lot of time taking tours of departments and really trying to understand some of their issues and constraints, but also just trying to get a handle on the projects and the various issues that face Tucson.
What distinctions or differences have you seen in the different city council office priorities?
Well, I don't know that I've seen a lot of differences. I think I've seen more commonality. Economic development is very important and huge, if you will, for all of the council offices, including the mayor.
And then the city departments, are you hearing budget-related questions and complaints?
Well, not really hearing complaints. I think they're expressing to me their issues and a lot of the challenges that they're facing. Most of the conversations start off with, several years ago we had more employees, and usually it's down several percentage points from what they have today. And they're still accomplishing a lot of the same or very similar services that were accomplished back when they had more staff. And so they've become much more innovative on how they provide those services, and ultimately it's been a challenge, but it's pretty clear that they've been able to withstand most of it.
And I'm sure those experiences are something you can relate to with your past management experiences in the city of Douglas and Cochise County. Those staffs must be lower also. Absolutely,
absolutely. And it's really all-inclusive. I mean, it's not just the revenues, from the state but the economy, sales tax, and those kinds of things that really impact the ability to provide the fundamental services that agencies need to provide to their constituency groups.
Now, Cochise County is smaller both in population and in budget.
Correct.
So what will you bring from that experience and that management that will add to Tucson, or how does it differ? What are you learning?
Well, it's different in magnitude or in size, but the approach is pretty much the same. And one of the things that I've conveyed to folks that ask me that exact question is the advantage of being in a smaller environment, if you will, is that you have opportunity to engage in detail. You have opportunity to really understand revenues and expenditures and programs and projects to the level that when you're in a larger organization, you really don't get that kind of experience. So I think it prepares you very well for a step up, if you will, in terms of magnitude. So those are the similarities. Obviously, the differences are that we are in difficult financial times, as everyone is. And the fact that the Mayor and Council has been able to address and solve the issues, if you will, that have been presented, I think is a testament to their leadership. And I also think that we've got some tough times ahead of us. It's certainly, we're not out of the woods when it comes to our finances, and I think that that's pretty much everyone that has seen a sluggish economy, come back, if you will.
So you've hit the nail on the head there. The city has seen several years of deficits. The budget is constantly something that needs to be worked out. What will you do to try and change that in future years?
Well, clearly, the priority for the council has been a structurally balanced budget, and those are just words, but that is a priority. I've heard from the council offices and from the mayor. How do we generate a structurally balanced budget? And we have used one-time fixes, one-time revenues. I think that's fine for a very short-term solution, but ultimately there needs to be a longer-term conversation and projection in terms of how do we do this? So my thought is to gather folks internally and basically lock them in a room and say, okay, here's the budget, and here's what I see as some of the issues that we face. Come up with recommendations that we can then look at internally as staff, and then ultimately present to the council as a part of about a mid-year report. And so in the December timeframe, maybe early January, I will have been here 6 months. My plan is to give the council a report based on what I've observed, based on the analysis that we have provided or we have performed, and develop some action or an action plan that will get us to that point of a structurally balanced budget. I can tell you that it's probably not going to happen in 1 year. I think it will be a multi-year approach. That's what I've suggested generally to the council, is that it will be a multi-year approach. But as long as we have a plan and we stick to it, I believe that we can accomplish that goal.
Do you lean more in the direction of trying to find new sources of revenue to fund the services as they stand today, or making some service cuts to meet the revenues as they stand today?
Yes to both.
Okay, something in between.
It has to be. It can't be just one or the other. I think enhancing revenue streams is important to look at, but oftentimes the time that takes to implement is difficult, and we don't really have a lot of time. But on the flip side, we can't just look at the expenditure side by itself. We've already done a great job of reducing expenses and so forth, but that's all part of it. So it's both looking at enhanced revenue streams and also a reduction in expenses as needed.
Now, I solicited questions on our Twitter account for the show, and somebody asked me, if you had $1 million cash right now, what would you do with that?
Put it in the bank and save it. I really think that our pay down of our public safety retirement system would be important for us to think about. So just first pass thought on that would be I'd probably pay it onto our retirement account to reduce that debt. And that unfunded liability is huge for the city of Tucson. And although we've done a good job of managing that thus far, I don't see those costs going down.
Let me just have you clarify what you mean, that unfunded liability in retirement.
Okay. The retirement system, the public safety personnel retirement system, has an analysis performed every year. The system actually performs an analysis every year, and that analysis will show what you need to have in that account. And each account, each entity has their own account. Our account needs, or our unfunded liability is a pretty big number. I don't know the exact number right this second because I know we've made some payments, but anything we do to make payments now or sooner reduces that both on interest earned as well as that ultimate principal payment. That analysis happens in time for us to set new rates, if you will, for what contributions the organization has to make to the employee's retirement. And so that initial, when you say I've got $1 million, that would probably be my vote. Not exactly sure yet, I'd have to analyze a little bit, but that would probably be my vote at this point.
Now, you also mentioned put it in the bank and save it. Is that a nod to needing to grow the amount of savings the city has?
Absolutely, and it's not just grow it to grow it, but one of the difficulties is when you look at Plan Tucson, there's some wonderful programs and wonderful projects that are listed and outlined in that plan, but without money, if you will, to implement them, they're nice plans. And so one of the things that I'm looking at is how do we build in flexibility for the mayor and council to make decisions. Right now, the decisions that the mayor and council make with regard to those expenses are, they almost have no choice. there's only, let's try to get to a structurally balanced budget. And so new programs or new ideas and new projects are very difficult to fund and very difficult for them to implement. And so what I'm really trying to do is build up enough of a reserve where the council will then have flexibility to institute programs or to make improvements to the community as a whole.
You brought up Plan Tucson. That's the city's long-term, or actually it's in the context of a city, probably quite short-term, 10 years planning what should happen next in the city. How much are you using that to get settled and guide your future decision-making?
Well, I can't tell you I'm using it every day, but that was one of the documents that I looked through as a part of my preparation for my interview with the council. And it's a wonderful plan, to the point where when I had not made a decision about applying for the manager position until I read that and thought, wow, I want to be a part of this. It's a wonderful outline for our community as a whole. And so I have suggested to the staff that we need to look at that as our guiding principles. It was approved by the voters, by the council, and so the framework for us to do business as a city government is in that blueprint, if you will.
Now, you mentioned making a 6-month report to the council in January. What do you still need to learn between now and then?
Everything. I wish I could tell you that I have this list. First and foremost is the budget, as I've spent a fair amount of time talking about that. I will be developing a thorough understanding of the budget. I think that understanding and that conversation, if you will drive pretty much everything that we do. Virtually everything we do has some kind of fiscal impact, negative or positive. And so for me to be able to give recommendations to the mayor and city council will require me to have an understanding of that budget. So that's really going to be my focus over the next few months.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Next on Arizona Week, frustration even after Arizona's Child Welfare Agency is revamped.
Why do we see a need and still want to fill it, even though it's so heartbreaking, even though it just, why? I don't know.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio this week, Mari Herreras of the Tucson Weekly, my colleague here at Arizona Public Media, Amanda LeClaire, and David Rupp-Calvis of Tucson Local Media. Thanks to each of you for coming in. Amanda, we're going to start with some news that just happened last night. The Arizona Supreme Court refused to hear a lawsuit that Pima County filed against the state of Arizona. Basically, the county was trying to challenge the way the state budget was written in such a way that property taxes will go up in Pima and Pinal counties. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court last night said it's not going to hear the case. What does that mean?
Well, it means that property taxes are going to go up, and somewhat significantly, but we right now don't know how much. The state has to hear or the county has to hear from the Property Tax Commission. It could go up between $8 million and $18 million, which is a huge difference.
Right, that's a huge amount on top of the budget. So we're going to wait to hear exactly what the property tax increase will be. But Mari, what is the county doing next in the meantime?
Well, all along, our county administrator, Chuck Huckleberry, told us back in June that no matter what, there were going to be legal steps taken. They were going to continue to follow a legal process against the state. So today they filed a suit in Maricopa Superior Court, and they think probably a year out that this whole process will take, the legal fight, so to speak, will be probably a year out.
And that's the crux of why taxes are going to go up either way, as Amanda mentioned, because this fight has to play itself out.
That's right.
Before there's maybe a reversal of those taxes, potentially, I guess, would be the best outcome for taxpayers.
That's right.
And David, we've been hearing that the housing market is doing quite well. There have been more sales, faster sales, foreclosures are down. Do you think that higher property taxes are going to have an impact on that?
Probably not. You know, the reality is when people go to buy a house, when they're looking to purchase, they set a budget, and when they do their budget, they include everything: their house payment, their taxes, their insurance. All of that has to fit within a certain amount. So what you may see is people buying houses that are a little bit cheaper to offset that, you know, and they may even consider the bond election coming up because that would increase taxes more. So people that are out there looking right now probably include all of that when they're thinking about buying, but I don't think it's going to stop them from buying. It just may change the house they're willing to purchase.
The decision they make as they buy.
Yes.
Or looking for different rates on their loan, potentially.
And they're still real low, so It's still a good time to buy.
Now, Mari, I do want to follow up on another story that we've been talking about for a few weeks here on the show, and that is the Tucson Police Department investigation into some potentially illegal massage parlors. There hasn't been any prosecution on that end, but we did wrap up the police side of the case this week. Tell us what happened.
So Department of Public Safety, DPS, had been doing an investigation, possibly 10 TPD employees involved in prostitution slash, for all intents and purposes, happy endings massage businesses. So far now we had 5 TPD officers fired, 2 resigned, and the where we left off, I think before, was that they were going through the civil service protocol, which meant letting them know this is coming up. You're going to probably face discipline action, and that's the next step now is the county prosecutor, and if they're going to file criminal charges. And we don't know yet whether that's going to be happening, but most likely. And from what I understand, I did make a call actually. They're going to probably be making an announcement next week that they'll be looking at filing charges against those officers.
So Amanda, you've been following this too. 5 officers are fired. Were there others that have been alleged to be involved? If so, what happened to them, and what happens next with these officers?
Well, a total of 7 officers are involved right now. There were a couple that resigned, and their status has been changed to terminated. The officers have the rights to appeal their dismissal. Right now, DPS is looking into charges, but an attorney for one of the officers did say that that is just a formality, and she does not expect charges to be filed against them. But there is one officer, as you said, that might definitely face some criminal charges. He seems more involved than others.
And then taking it outside of the Tucson Police Department, we are still unsure also whether there will be charges filed against the business owner of the one that there have been charges filed against one of those business owners, and the second one is up in the air at this point still. So to follow up on yet another story, Amanda, I'm going to go back to you. You covered a story for us here at Arizona Public Media this week about a neighborhood association fight is the best word I think I can use to come up with it for the Barrio Hollywood neighborhood. So set up what's happening there.
Well, it's been about 1.5 years in the making, is this disagreement between business owners, some business owners, not all of them, and some in the neighborhood association. It's a very complicated issue. There's a lot of he said, she said. But overall, what's happening now and what just happened was a vote for the neighborhood association that businesses no longer can vote in it in future elections or decisions that the neighborhood association will make. And that was in response to at the election of the current president of the association, Casey Carlton, about 1.5 years ago, where some residents feel that businesses brought in their employees and other people associated with those businesses who are not Barrio Hollywood residents, and basically they're accusing them of stuffing the ballot. That was in response to that.
So because they thought that the businesses stuffed the ballots, the neighborhood voted to no more votes for businesses?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Now you were at one of the meetings this week. Can you kind of just describe the tone, the atmosphere?
It's very vitriolic. I mean, they're very passionate people on both sides of this, and it was a rough meeting. There was some yelling and things, but I think overall it's not exactly what is happening, step by step. The overall issue is that the neighborhood and a lot of people in the neighborhood are afraid of gentrification. You could argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or that it's even happening at all, but this has happened across the country. Gentrification is a huge issue. Neighborhoods have been changed from San Francisco to Williamsburg and New York. The old residents end up getting kicked out because property taxes were raised, rents get raised, things change, and new people come in. And I think the Barrio Hollywood residents, because it's such an old Hispanic neighborhood, they don't want to see that happen. And I think they are trying to proactively make sure that that neighborhood retains the traditions that have been there for decades now.
Yeah, it's a neighborhood that sure has, it's a multiple generational Mexican-American neighborhood, no doubt. But at this point, it is pretty mixed. I mean, it's a multi-ethnic neighborhood, but it is rooted in a lot of early Chicano political history of Tucson. Really took place across the street from the neighborhood boundaries right there at El Rio Golf Course. And so there's a lot of rich history there that's really important to a lot of people, and a lot of people who are very involved in the Barrio Hollywood Neighborhood Association as well. And gentrification is an important issue that not just the West Side folks are interested in and worried about, but it's definitely a South Tucson issue. There are people in South Tucson that, in the Choa community there, that have been looking at gentrification and how it can potentially change that neighborhood too. Especially, I think, in neighborhoods in Tucson where we do have multiple generational ownership and people are struggling to keep their homes in some neighborhoods, there is that worry that, wow, this could just be pulled out from under us. And then in Barrio Hollywood, where you have the residential versus concerns of the business community, it was one of those things that they saw further, that this could really erode our what we've worked to create here, and that was really the biggest the catalyst for them in making that bylaw change.
And just to be clear about where we're talking, you mentioned the El Rio Golf Course. We're talking south of Speedway, west of I-10, north of St. Mary's.
Yeah, if you take St. Mary's just across the freeway, that's where Barrio Hollywood starts. Menlo Park is next to it as well. And for people who aren't familiar with that area, the reason the residents also feel that it is primed to become the next neighborhood for urban renewal is because it's so close to downtown. It's a 5-minute bike ride. You could walk. It's in the streetcar now, goes through it as well. So it's
and I can just say, I mean, I love the West Side, and Barrio Hollywood and Menlo Park really mean a lot to me. And that's not because my family's from those areas. My family's from South Tucson, about South 7th, and totally different area of town. But there's a lot of good feeling there, and it's safe neighborhoods. You feel good. I feel, as a woman living in Menlo Park, really safe. It's just a great, rich, friendly community. And so there's some good reasons why I can see why people would concern. But also, it's a great place to live, there's no doubt.
And Amanda, we talked about what the residents, what their concerns are or their fears. What about the businesses? What are they saying about this situation?
A lot of businesses are upset. Ones that have fallen on the other side of this debate. Most of them are saying, though, that they are for the barrio. They do support it. This is where the issue gets a little complicated, because there's the Fiesta Grande festival that happens every year there, and some of these, I think, negative feelings are based around that, as well as the homeowner, the association, the neighborhood association. It's kind of hard to figure out where exactly, that line is drawn.
Those lines. Oh, okay. Yeah. So they're just kind of mixing a bunch of issues, and it's all rooted in gentrification worries.
Yeah, that's. I, as an outside observer, I can say that the fear of the neighborhood changing is the umbrella over all of these smaller issues that are happening.
This is a chance to pivot to the cover story in Inside Tucson Business, David, is about some of Tucson's oldest businesses. And I'm not sure any on your list are actually in Barrio Hollywood, but certainly some of them will have similarities and are representative of those same kind of historic, long-time institutions in Tucson. So I wanted to ask you what the oldest business is that you covered on this story and why it's significant.
Well, the oldest one was the Tanque Verde Guest Ranch. And we had about 7 or 8 different businesses profiled that range from about 70 years old to Tanque Verde Guest Ranch, which is actually older than Tucson. So it's 160-something years old. It's been around a long time. We do this every year. We have one issue that we set aside to look at the oldest businesses. And I think it's important because it gives, whether you're in the Barrio Hollywood or anywhere in Tucson or in the region, if you're a business owner, a business manager, it gives you an idea to look at and read these and say, how have they succeeded? How have they survived? Some of them are family businesses that have passed down generation to generation. Some of them are private businesses that have sold to 15 different companies through the years. But, they've all been able to survive and thrive in Tucson.
What is that main line of consistency that you saw covering these that helped them stay alive?
I think the number one thing is they learn to adapt. A lot of them started off as one thing, and they may still have the name, or at least part of the name, but they've all changed. Take the Tanque Verde Guest Ranch. Mm-hmm. Started off as a traditional ranch. The guy that started it, long time ago, he grew produce and he ran cattle on it probably, and he was actually got real successful, and people didn't like it and went and hung him.
Oh.
He survived the hanging but died a few years later, and his son took over. And his son ran it to the 1920s when he sold it to someone that's outside the family, Jim Converse. And Jim Converse decided he's going to do something different. He's the one that started dafting. You know, he still had a ranch, but he opened a dude ranch. Started bringing tourists in, and the tourists would come in and they would spend a week or a weekend. And I don't know, Jim probably didn't charge him much because he used them to do all his work. You know, they would work for free while they were there, you know, and so through the years, it's just added more to that feel. It's become more now a tourist attraction than actually a ranch. People come from all over the globe now to visit the Tanque Verde Guest Ranch. Started off as a traditional farm and a ranch, and it's changed into a real business now.
I'm not sure everybody who lives in Tucson is as familiar with it as maybe some of the tourists. You mentioned that European and Asian tourists are coming here a lot to see this.
Asian tourists love them. You know, they sit over there and they watch Hollywood movies, old-fashioned Hollywood movies. They watch John Wayne. They idolize the cowboy, and so when they get a chance to go on vacation, they want to go be a cowboy. So they can come to the Tanque Verde Guest Ranch and they can spend all week riding cattle, you know, or riding horses, looking at cattle, seeing how produce is actually farmed. They get to experience, and then they go home and feel like they're a cowboy. You know, so it elevates them. You know, we live here in the middle of it. We probably don't idolize cowboys as much as they do in other places.
And we don't go to the ranch because we live here.
It actually has become the #1 wedding destination venue in the whole state. So people are using it for a lot of different reasons. There are businesses that will go hold, you know, they'll take all their employees out there and spend the week doing training and stuff just to be away and do something different. But most of the tourists are not Tucson people.
Now, also on your list, you have 2 museums and a school. So how did you define business for the purposes of this article?
It's interesting. Business for most people is a for-profit. We looked at it as, and this specific thing is something that survived. You know, the 2 museums, the Arizona State Museum, the Tucson Museum of Art, they're both nonprofit agencies. But any nonprofit agency that's been around for 70, 80, 90 years has done something right. They have a business plan. They follow a business plan. They survive. There's lots of nonprofits that close all the time because they have to bring money in just to keep the doors open. You know, you still have bills, you still have employees you have to pay. And so these places, Greenfield's Country Day School is the school, you know, they've adapted through the years. I don't know if they're nonprofit or for-profit, but you know, they do charge, and they do have to have money to pay their teachers and their principals, and they have to pay their utility bills. So they all have to bring money, and they'll have to have business plans that are successful, even if they're not a for-profit business.
Okay. And Mari, your cover story on the Tucson Weekly this week is about the reintroduction of the Mexican gray wolf, and it actually is quite comprehensive history. What is the takeaway?
Takeaway is that on one hand, it's very challenging, and the challenge is the fact that we still have working ranches, and is the wolf going to survive and being a predator? But last year they had the largest birth of pups that they'd seen in latest recorded data, and so that was uplifting. But there are other groups out there that are still working toward making sure that the recovery is done well, and that they're still listed as a threatened species in order for them to continue being protected.
One of the topics in the article is the conflict about where to release those reintroduced wolves, the ones that are being reintroduced as opposed to wild-born. With open wilderness, where the wolves, trying to find open wilderness where the wolves are not going to encounter any livestock that is grazing on public lands or private lands that don't have high quality or high height fencing.
Right. And that's a challenge in Arizona, because we do have a lot of grazing land, or a lot of our open lands are used for grazing grazing rights. The challenge is finding that land, and they've been able to do that, but again, it's not as large of a space as they intentionally wanted from the beginning.
And the story kind of opens with the story of one specific wolf, an elderly female. That's not the one that we were having questions about at the Grand Canyon this previous year.
No, it's not.
Tell us about that situation.
That situation in the Grand Canyon, where we saw a wolf that was killed or died. That situation was kind of one where really we were starting to question, was this program going to be effective? And what were we going to see this species be able to continue? And I think, from what I understand, the recovery program, or the folks behind that, still feel that they can move forward. Other folks, like Center for Biological Diversity, however, really are moving toward wanting to make sure that Fish and Wildlife is accountable, wanting to make sure that the recovery folks are accountable as well.
I'm going to have to stop you there just because we're out of time, so I appreciate that. Thanks to all of you. As usual, all the stories we produce at Arizona Public Media are available on our website, and you can watch past episodes of this and other TV shows there. Now, Arizona Week takes a look at some of the changes being made within the Department of Child Safety.